In this video, we're going to go over a couple of important positions that deal with knight and pawns that everybody should know. In this first position, white has a pawn and a knight, and obviously he's going to try to queen that pawn so he can win the game, and black is going to try to stop him. Well, here, if white is bringing his king closer, thinking that the pawn is protected and black will not be able to take it, he's actually only going to get a draw. Because after black moves the king to b4, now the knight is attacked and the pawn at the same time. And here, if white moves the king to f3, what's going to happen is that black is going to be able to take the knight, and white will not have enough time to come and defend the pawn. Black will take the pawn and then achieve a draw. And if we go back, if white will check the king with knight to c6, moving the knight, black will simply take the pawn and get a draw this way. We know that king and knight is a drawn position. But coming back from the beginning, this is actually a win for white with correct play. The correct move here is knight to c4, where the pawn defends the knight. If black tries to do the same thing, attacking the pawn and the knight at the same time, the knight now can simply come to d2, defending the pawn. And after black moves the king to c3, attacking the knight and the pawn, here the knight can actually be sacrificed, because if black does dare to take the knight, he's not going to be able to stop the pawn from promoting. So he can play the king to g3, and after black takes the knight, the pawn will simply march and black will not be able to stop it from promoting. And coming back, if black, instead of taking the knight, retreats trying to reach stalemate, that's not going to happen, because even if in the end he's going to be able to come back and reach a stalemate position, white can simply lose a tempo by moving the knight, and now black will be forced to get out of the promoting square, where white will come with the king to c7 and then from here promote the pawn. In our next position, here we're dealing with blocked pawns. And again, black's goal is to try to take the pawn on c4. But with white to move here, this is an easy win. The correct play for white is knight to b5. After moving the knight to b5, the knight together with the pawn creates a wall that does not allow black to come near the pawn. So here, if black is trying to come around that wall, let's say king to e4, white will simply start bringing his king closer, let's say king d3. Well, after black attacks the pawn on c4, the knight could simply come back to d6, guarding that pawn. And now the black king will have to chase the knight away again. So let's say king to d4, we're going to bring our king closer, king f2, king e5, and again the knight will jump back to b5, creating a wall. And from here, after black retreats to e6, white will simply make progress with his king and then eventually take the pawn and win the game from here. The next position that's very important to know, it's a deep freeze type of position where white's pawn stops both of black's pawns on e6 and f7. Here, if the knight can reach the square d7, where he defends the pawn and also attacks the square f6, he's able to win this game. Here, if the black king attacks the pawn on e5, white can simply start marching his king closer because black cannot take that pawn, and the only other try that black has here is trying to exchange his pawn, moving the pawn to f6. Well, here white can simply take that pawn since the knight is guarding it, and black cannot save this game. Trying to promote his pawn is not going to work, as white will queen first, and after black retreats to g6 trying to reach stalemate, white is still able to win. Let's say king to f3, after black comes to f7, king e4. Here black attacks the knight with king to e8, and now the knight has to move. Best move is knight to e5, creating a wall. As you could see, the pawn attacks the square e7 and g7, and now the knight attacks the squares d7 and f7. So here, let's say black moves the king to d8, king d4, king c7, king c5, and then slowly pushing black back, and then white can simply push the pawn, and now black is forced to move the king to g7. Let's say king e7, king h7, and here white has to be super careful, because if he promotes to a queen here, this is stalemate, and black achieves a draw. So the white has to promote to a rook. So make sure you're very careful in these type of positions not to play too fast, because you might end up in a draw if you're not too careful. And coming back from the beginning, I do want to mention that if black had his pawn on e7 and f7, this would not be a win for white anymore. So let's take a look why. Here, if white moves the knight to d7, black can simply bring the king to f5, and now if white is trying to make progress bringing his king closer, after black moves the pawn to f6, there's nothing that white can do to prevent the exchange here. If white is moving the king, black will simply take the pawn and then achieve a draw this way, and if white is taking the pawn, black is able to take back with the pawn on e7 and also achieving a draw. And in the end, I want to show you another position. If you're playing black here and you have a passed rook pawn, you want to make sure that you never ever go with your king in the corner. Because many times here, if your opponent has his king near and can block you there, he can actually checkmate you. Here, after knight moves to b4, black is forced to push the pawn. The king cannot move to a2 as the knight attacks that square. He's also blocked from reaching the squares b2 and b1 because of the white king, and after black pushes the pawn to a2, knight to c2 is checkmate. If you liked my video, please subscribe and don't forget to check out my new website, masteryourchess.com, where you can learn, practice, test, and master your chess knowledge.